Welcome to the Billionaire's Choice. Subscribe and turn on notifications to enjoy more heartwarming stories of love and destiny. Let us know where you're watching from, and let's begin today's story. Sometimes the most powerful photograph is the one that was never meant to be taken. Rain had a way of changing New York City after midnight. It softened the endless noise, blurred the sharp edges of towering glass buildings, and made every glowing street lamp look like a memory waiting to happen. Most people hurried home the moment dark clouds rolled over Manhattan, ducking beneath umbrellas or disappearing into the warmth of yellow taxis. Elena Whitmore never did. While everyone else ran from the rain, she chased it. Freelance photography didn't pay the bills every week, especially when newspapers were cutting staff and replacing front-page stories with stock images generated in quiet offices miles away. But Elena refused to stop believing there were still moments worth capturing, moments that couldn't be staged or recreated. Her old camera hung from a weathered leather strap across her shoulder as she walked through Bryant Park, her sneakers already soaked through after 2 hours of searching for something real. She had exactly $23 left in her checking account. Rent was due in 4 days, and the small photography magazine she occasionally worked for had given her one simple assignment: bring us a picture people can't ignore. She smiled to herself as raindrops rolled off the brim of her baseball cap. Easier said than done. Couples kissing beneath umbrellas had become cliches years ago. Reflections in puddles had been photographed a million times. Even the city skyline seemed tired tonight, hidden behind thick curtains of rain. She adjusted her lens and kept walking. Sometimes the city rewarded patience. Sometimes it didn't. As she crossed 42nd Street, traffic slowed beneath flashing red lights, their reflections stretching across the wet pavement like ribbons of liquid fire. That was when she noticed him. He wasn't running. He wasn't checking his phone. He wasn't looking for shelter. A tall man stood alone near the edge of the sidewalk, wearing a charcoal overcoat already darkened by the rain. His hands rested quietly inside his pockets as if time itself had stopped around him. He faced the empty street with an expression Elena couldn't quite explain. It wasn't sadness. It wasn't anger. It looked more like someone carrying a conversation with memories nobody else could hear. Cars splashed past him. Pedestrians brushed around him without making eye contact. Yet he never moved an inch. Elena instinctively lifted her camera before lowering it again. She had built her reputation on respecting people, not stealing private moments simply because they looked beautiful. She hesitated. Then she slowly walked closer until she was several feet away. "Excuse me," she called gently over the sound of the rain. The man turned toward her. His blue eyes were calm, almost surprised that anyone had spoken to him. "I'm a freelance photographer," she said, holding up her camera instead of immediately raising it. "I know this sounds strange, but there's something honest about this moment. Would you mind if I took one photograph?" He studied her face for several quiet seconds. Most wealthy executives Elena had photographed at charity galas demanded contracts, assistance, approvals, or publicity rights before allowing a single image. This stranger simply glanced toward the rain, then back at her, and gave the smallest nod she had ever seen. "One picture," he answered softly. His voice carried no arrogance, no impatience, just quiet exhaustion wrapped in perfect manners. "Thank you," Elena replied. She stepped backward, adjusted her focus, and looked through the viewfinder. The city disappeared. There was only one man standing beneath the rain, framed by blurred headlights and silver reflections dancing across the pavement. She pressed the shutter once. Click. Then again. Click. The second photograph caught something different. The stranger closed his eyes for only a heartbeat as rain traced across his face. And in that instant he looked less like a powerful businessman and more like an ordinary son remembering someone he missed. Elena lowered the camera. "I appreciate it," she said with a grateful smile. "I hope your evening gets better." The man looked at her as though those simple words meant more than she could possibly know. A faint smile appeared before disappearing almost immediately. "I hope yours does too," he replied. Then a black sedan quietly pulled alongside the curb. The rear door opened from the inside. Elena assumed it was a rideshare finally arriving. She gave him a polite wave before continuing down the sidewalk, already wondering whether the photographs would even be worth editing. Behind her, the stranger stepped into the waiting car without another word. Within seconds, both the vehicle and the moment vanished into the rain. Elena had no idea she had just photographed one of the most recognizable billionaires in America. She certainly didn't know that before sunrise, editors across the country would fight over the image she almost decided not to take, or that by breakfast, every major newspaper in the United States would carry the same haunting photograph across its front page. Elena slept through the sound of her phone vibrating across the tiny nightstand beside her bed. The apartment was barely large enough for a couch, a folding table, and the mattress she had pushed against the window, but exhaustion had won long before midnight. Outside, the rain had finally stopped, leaving the city washed clean beneath a pale gray sunrise. Her phone buzzed again, then again. By the time she opened one sleepy eye and reached for it, there were 28 missed calls, dozens of text messages, and more email notifications than she had received during the entire previous month. She frowned, convinced someone had made a mistake. The first message came from her editor. "Elena, call me immediately." The second was shorter. "Front page. Every paper. Now." She sat upright so quickly that the blanket slid onto the floor. Before dialing anyone, she opened the first news application on her phone. Her breath caught. Filling nearly the entire screen was the photograph she had taken less than 12 hours earlier. Rain shimmered across the frame like scattered diamonds. The blurred headlights behind the lone figure painted the street in warm gold while his calm expression remained. Perfectly still, untouched by the chaos surrounding him. Beneath the image appeared a headline that instantly made her heart race. Alastair Vaughan seen in public for the first time in 3 weeks. Elena whispered the name aloud. She knew it immediately. Everyone did. Founder of Vaughan Dynamics. Billionaire entrepreneur. One of the youngest business leaders in America. A man whose interviews were watched by millions and whose public appearances had become increasingly rare over the past year. Her stomach tightened. That was him. The stranger standing alone in the rain. She quickly opened another newspaper. The same photograph. Then another. And another. Every major publication had licensed the image overnight after her editor submitted it through a national photo syndication service. Some papers cropped it tighter. Others printed it across an entire page. But every version carried the same haunting silence she had witnessed with her own eyes. Elena could barely process what she was seeing before her phone rang again. It was her editor, Frank. His voice exploded through the speaker before she could say hello. "Where are you?" he asked. "At home," she answered, still staring at the screen. "Please tell me you know who that man was." "I do now." Frank laughed in disbelief. "Half the country wants to know how you got that picture. Television producers are calling. Business magazines are calling. Even international outlets are asking for interviews. Did he arrange this? Was it a publicity campaign?" "No," Elena answered honestly. "He was just standing there." Frank fell quiet for a moment. "You are telling me the most photographed businessman in America simply let you take his picture?" I asked politely. Another long silence followed. "Well," Frank finally said, "apparently kindness still works." After ending the call, Elena brewed the cheapest coffee she could afford and sat beside the window, watching commuters hurry toward another workday. Her inbox continued filling faster than she could read it. Some people praised the image as one of the most human portraits ever taken of a billionaire. Others debated what the expression on his face meant. Financial analysts speculated that he looked worried about his company. Lifestyle columnists insisted he appeared heartbroken. Social media users invented dozens of dramatic theories within hours. Elena ignored them all because none of them had been there. They had not seen the quiet respect with which he nodded before she raised her camera. They had not heard the gentleness in his voice when he agreed to one photograph. They certainly had not witnessed the almost invisible smile that appeared when she wished him a better evening. Every opinion online felt strangely incomplete. By mid-morning, television screens inside coffee shops replayed the image while anchors discussed Alastair Vaughan's mysterious disappearance from public life. Commentators wondered why no security team had been visible. Investors questioned whether his absence signaled changes inside Vaughan Dynamics. Reporters searched every block around Bryant Park, hoping to reconstruct his movements from the previous night. Meanwhile, Elena quietly opened the original file stored on her memory card. She enlarged the second photograph until it filled her computer screen. There, hidden inside thousands of tiny raindrops, she noticed something she had missed before. Alastair was not looking at the city at all. His eyes rested on a small memorial bench across the street. almost invisible in the blurred background. Suddenly, the photograph no longer looked like a business story. It looked personal, deeply personal. And for the first time since waking up, Elena wondered if the picture that had transformed her career might also have captured a private grief that the entire world was now trying to explain without ever knowing the truth. Across Manhattan, the morning unfolded like any other trading day, but inside the top floor of Von Dynamics headquarters, the atmosphere was unusually quiet. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city skyline. Yet the man whose decisions influenced thousands of employees had not spoken a single unnecessary word since arriving. Alistair Vaughn stood beside the glass with a folded newspaper resting on the conference table behind him. The photograph filled nearly half the front page. Several executives exchanged uncertain glances as they waited for the weekly leadership meeting to begin. No one dared mention the image first. Finally, his chief operating officer cleared his throat. The media response has been significant. Alistair remained silent. Another executive slid a tablet across the polished table. Your communications team has prepared 3 possible statements if you wish to address yesterday evening. Without looking at the screen, Alistair calmly replied, "There will be no statement." The room fell silent again. "But investors are asking questions," another board member said carefully. "Let them ask." His answer was gentle, not cold, yet firm enough to end the discussion. After several uncomfortable moments, the meeting shifted toward quarterly reports and international expansion, but Alistair barely heard the presentations. His attention kept returning to the photograph lying only a few feet away. Not because it threatened his reputation, not because it had become the most discussed business image of the year. It was because the young photographer had somehow captured the one expression he had spent decades hiding from the world. When the meeting finally ended, Alistair picked up the newspaper and quietly dismissed everyone else. The large office became perfectly still. He carried the paper toward a bookshelf where a single framed photograph rested beside several business awards. It showed a smiling woman wearing a light blue raincoat, holding the hand of a little boy standing beneath the same maple trees that still lined Bryant Park. The boy could not have been older than 8. Alistair gently touched the corner of the frame before looking back at the newspaper. "You always love the rain," he whispered. Every year, on the same date, he returned to the same bench where his mother had once waited with him after school. She had believed rainy afternoons slowed people down enough to notice life instead of rushing through it. They never owned expensive umbrellas. Instead, they laughed whenever they became soaked, stopping at a small bakery afterward for cinnamon rolls that cost less than $5. Those afternoons had become the happiest memories of his childhood. Years later, after success transformed his life beyond anything either of them could have imagined, the tradition remained. Every year, he visited that bench alone. No assistants, no security walking beside him, no scheduled appearances. Just one quiet hour to remember the woman who had taught him that kindness would always outlast wealth. Until yesterday, no one outside his closest circle had ever known. Yet somehow a stranger with an old camera had preserved that private ritual forever. Across town, Elena continued studying the original image on her laptop. Something still felt unfinished. She enlarged the background again, this time noticing the bronze plaque attached to the memorial bench. The words were blurred, but one name remained barely readable. Margaret Vaughn. Elena searched local park records online. Within minutes, she found a short article published nearly 20 years earlier. The bench had been donated anonymously in memory of Margaret Vaughn, a public school music teacher remembered for organizing free neighborhood concerts every summer. Elena leaned back in her chair. A music teacher, not a billionaire, not a celebrity, just someone who had quietly improved other people's lives. Suddenly everything made sense. The rain, the silence, the direction of his eyes, the peaceful expression that so many commentators had mistaken for corporate anxiety. She closed every news website without reading another headline. None of them understood what they were looking at. They had seen the richest man in the room. She had unknowingly photographed a son keeping a promise. That realization filled her with both gratitude and guilt. She never would have pressed the shutter if she believed she was intruding on grief. Yet he had looked directly at her, listened to her request, and chosen to say yes. That choice mattered. As afternoon sunlight finally broke through the clouds, Elena removed the memory card from her camera and placed it carefully inside a small protective case she always carried. It suddenly felt less like a successful assignment and more like something entrusted to her. At that exact moment, several miles away, Alistair opened his private assistant's secure contact directory. He did not ask for lawyers. He did not ask for the public relations department. Instead, he gave one simple instruction. Find the photographer, he said with a quiet smile. Not because I want the picture back, because I want to thank her in person. 2 days passed before Elena finally silenced the last of the interview requests. She had politely declined every television appearance, ignored offers from marketing agencies, and refused to exaggerate a story she knew had never happened. There was no secret meeting, no exclusive interview, no dramatic confession beneath the rain. There had only been a stranger who agreed to one photograph. That was the truth, and she intended to keep it that way. Late Friday afternoon, her phone vibrated once again. Expecting another producer, she almost ignored it until she noticed the unfamiliar number carried a Manhattan business exchange. She answered cautiously. "This is Elena Whitmore." A calm female voice replied. "Good afternoon, Ms. Whitmore. My name is Grace Holloway. I work for Mr. Alistair Vaughn. He was hoping to thank you personally for your kindness the other evening. Would you be available for coffee tomorrow morning?" Elena blinked in surprise. "Coffee?" Grace laughed softly. "Yes, just coffee. No lawyers. No contracts. No press." Elena hesitated for only a moment before answering. "All right." The meeting was arranged at a quiet independent cafe on the Upper West Side, far from television cameras and financial reporters. Saturday morning arrived bright and clear, as though the city itself wanted to erase every trace of the storm that had unexpectedly connected two strangers. Elena arrived 15 minutes early out of habit. She wore a simple navy sweater, jeans, and carried the same weathered camera bag resting beside her chair. She ordered black coffee and watched people stroll past the windows with dogs, shopping bags, and children laughing on scooters. It felt wonderfully ordinary. At exactly 10 o'clock, the cafe door opened. Alistair Vaughn stepped inside alone. No bodyguards, no assistants, no expensive entourage announcing his arrival. Several customers briefly looked up before returning to their conversations, apparently recognizing him only after he had already crossed half the room. He spotted Elena immediately and smiled with the same quiet warmth she remembered from the rainy sidewalk. "Thank you for coming," he said as he reached the table. "Thank you for inviting me," she replied. They shook hands. His handshake was firm but unhurried, carrying none of the rehearsed confidence she had expected from someone whose face appeared on magazine covers every month. After ordering plain coffee, he sat across from her. For a few seconds neither of them spoke. Then Alistair surprised her completely. "I owe you an apology." Elena looked confused. "An apology? I unintentionally turned your life upside down." She laughed for the first time since arriving. "I think the newspapers helped with that." He smiled. "Probably." Another quiet pause settled comfortably between them. Finally, Alistair reached into a leather portfolio and carefully removed a folded newspaper, placing it on the table. The famous photograph faced upward. "I have looked at this picture dozens of times," he admitted. "Most people see a billionaire standing in the rain." His eyes drifted toward the image. "You somehow photographed my mother without ever meeting her." Elena lowered her eyes toward the newspaper. "I found the memorial bench," she said gently. "I was afraid I had captured something too private." Alistair slowly shook his head. "You asked permission." "I almost did not." "But you did." He leaned back slightly before continuing. "That matters more than you know." Elena studied him for a moment before asking the question she had been carrying since Thursday morning. "Why were you really there?" Alistair glanced through the cafe window where sunlight reflected across the passing traffic. "Every year on that date, I visit the place where my mother used to wait for me after school. We never had much money. Rainy days meant fewer customers at the bakery nearby." He smiled faintly. "The owner always gave us one extra cinnamon roll because my mother volunteered at the neighborhood music program." Elena listened. Quietly. "After I built my company, I offered to buy the bakery. The owner refused." Alistair laughed softly. "He told me memories are not for sale." Elena smiled. "He sounds wise." He was. Their coffees arrived, filling the silence with the comforting aroma of freshly roasted beans. Neither of them reached for the cups immediately. Instead, They continued looking at the photograph lying between them like an unexpected bridge connecting two completely different lives. Finally, Elena spoke. People keep asking me how I convinced you to let me take the picture. Alistair looked directly into her eyes. Would you like to know the real answer? She nodded. Because you were the first person that evening who looked at me as a human being instead of a headline. Elena felt unexpectedly emotional. She had spent years wondering whether honest photography still mattered in a world driven by spectacle and instant attention. Hearing those words from the man sitting across from her quietly restored something she had almost lost. As they finally lifted their coffee cups, neither of them noticed someone across the street quietly raising a phone toward the cafe window, capturing an image that, unlike Elena's photograph, was taken without permission and with entirely different intentions. The photograph resting between their coffee cups quietly marked the beginning of something neither of them had expected. Over the following weeks, Elena returned to her normal assignments, chasing stories across New York City with the same aging camera and the same determination that had carried her through years of uncertainty. She photographed neighborhood food drives in Queens, high school marching bands practicing beneath fading autumn skies, and volunteers repainting a neglected community center in Brooklyn. They were not glamorous stories, but they reminded people that kindness still existed in ordinary places. Every few days, her phone would buzz with a simple message from Alistair. Sometimes he shared an old photograph of his mother's music classroom. Sometimes he asked where she was shooting that afternoon. Sometimes he simply wished her luck before an assignment. Their conversations never felt forced. They unfolded naturally, built on curiosity instead of expectation. One crisp Saturday morning, Elena invited him to join her while she documented a volunteer cleanup along the Hudson River. She expected him to politely decline. Instead, he arrived wearing blue jeans, comfortable walking shoes, and a plain gray sweatshirt with no company logo anywhere in sight. Several volunteers recognized him immediately, but seemed more surprised that he was carrying garbage bags instead of giving speeches. For 4 hours, Alistair worked beside retirees, college students, firefighters, and neighborhood families without introducing himself once. Elena quietly captured the moments that mattered most. A little boy handed Alistair a pair of work gloves after noticing his hands had become dirty. An elderly woman thanked him for carrying heavy bags to the recycling truck. A teenage volunteer laughed when Alistair admitted he had absolutely no talent for separating different types of recyclable plastics. Watching him move through the crowd, Elena realized something important. The kindness she had seen in the rain had not been a rare exception. It was simply who he was when nobody expected anything from him. A week later, their worlds shifted again. This time, Alistair invited Elena to Von Dynamics headquarters for the unveiling of a scholarship program honoring public school music teachers across the country. Elena almost declined, worried she would feel out of place inside one of Manhattan's most prestigious corporate buildings. Yet curiosity won. The lobby alone seemed larger than her entire apartment building, with polished marble floors reflecting sunlight pouring through towering windows. Employees greeted one another by name as they crossed the spacious atrium, and despite the company's enormous size, the atmosphere felt unexpectedly welcoming. Alistair met her near the elevators with the same relaxed smile she had first seen beneath the rain. "Ready?" he asked. "Honestly." Elena laughed. "Not even a little." "Good," he replied. "Neither was I on my first day." As they rode toward the executive floor, he pointed toward different departments, introducing people they passed not by job titles, but by personal stories. "That is Daniel. He coaches youth baseball every weekend. Over there is Priya. She volunteers at the animal shelter every Thursday. Marcus restored a historic theater in Harlem with his father." Elena noticed something unusual. Alistair remembered everyone's names, families, hobbies, and dreams. He did not speak about profits first. He spoke about people. During the scholarship announcement, reporters filled the auditorium expecting another polished corporate presentation. Instead, Alistair surprised everyone by dedicating the program to teachers whose quiet encouragement changed lives long before success ever arrived. As applause echoed through the room, Elena instinctively lifted her camera. This time, she did not photograph the billionaire standing beneath expensive stage lights. She focused on the front row where dozens of retired music teachers wiped tears from their eyes while holding handwritten letters from former students. After the ceremony, they escaped onto a rooftop terrace overlooking the Manhattan skyline. The afternoon breeze carried the distant sounds of traffic far below. Elena reviewed the photographs on her camera while Alistair leaned comfortably against the railing. "You always miss the obvious picture," he observed with an amused smile. Elena looked up. "What do you mean?" "Every photographer inside photographed me at the podium." She nodded. "I photographed the people who inspired the speech." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Alistair quietly said, "That is exactly why your photographs stay with people." Elena smiled, lowering her camera. Neither of them noticed that several stories below, someone inside a neighboring office building was carefully watching the rooftop through a telephoto lens, collecting images that would soon be arranged into a completely different narrative, one designed not to celebrate kindness, but to create suspicion where none had ever existed. Monday morning began with an uneasy silence that neither Elena nor Alistair could explain. Before sunrise, anonymous accounts across several social media platforms began sharing a collage of carefully cropped photographs. One image showed them laughing over coffee. Another captured them standing together at the volunteer cleanup along the Hudson River. A third showed them talking on the rooftop terrace after the scholarship ceremony. Individually, every photograph was perfectly ordinary. Together, they were presented beneath a dramatic headline claiming that Von Dynamics had secretly manipulated the now-famous Rain photograph as part of an elaborate public relations campaign. Within hours, online speculation spread faster than facts ever could. Commentators insisted the emotional photograph had been staged to distract investors from upcoming business decisions. Others claimed Elena had been hired months in advance to manufacture sympathy for the billionaire. Television panels debated the so-called evidence without ever speaking to either of them. Elena stared at the endless stream of accusations from her apartment, feeling her stomach tighten with every refresh. She had spent years protecting her credibility, believing that honesty was the only thing a freelance journalist truly owned. Now strangers questioned every assignment she had ever completed. Her phone rang repeatedly as editors requested statements, while friends texted messages asking if everything they were reading was true. She answered every call with the same calm response. No, none of it happened that way. Across town, Von Dynamics faced a different kind of pressure. Investors demanded explanations. Financial commentators questioned the company's transparency. Although the business itself remained stable, uncertainty began casting a shadow over conversations that had nothing to do with quarterly performance. During an executive meeting, several advisors recommended issuing carefully worded statements denying any personal relationship with the photographer. Others suggested quietly distancing the company from Elena altogether. Alistair listened without interruption before calmly closing the presentation folder in front of him. "We are not going to protect the truth by abandoning someone who has done nothing wrong," he said. The room fell completely silent. "But public perception is shifting," one executive replied cautiously. Alistair nodded. "Then we respond with facts instead of fear." Meanwhile, Elena refused to hide. She opened every original file stored on her memory cards, reviewing thousands of photographs from the past month. Every timestamp matched her documented assignments. Every location aligned with transportation receipts, publication records, and camera logs. Then she paused. Professional cameras automatically stored more than images. They preserved precise metadata, including the exact second each photograph was taken, camera settings, lens information, and an untouched digital signature created the instant the shutter clicked. She quickly inserted the memory card containing the famous Rain photograph into her computer and opened the untouched RAW file. Nothing had ever been edited. Nothing had been staged. Everything existed exactly as it had happened. Elena leaned closer to the screen. The embedded timestamp confirmed the photograph had been taken several minutes before the black sedan arrived. Even more importantly, the GPS coordinates placed her alone on the sidewalk long before any Von Dynamics personnel entered the area. She immediately called Frank, her editor. "I think I can prove everything," she said. Less than an hour later, Elena sat inside the magazine's digital archive department with two imaging specialists examining the original files. They carefully verified every layer of metadata, using independent forensic software commonly trusted by courts and major news organizations. One technician finally leaned back from the monitor and smiled. "These files are pristine," he said. "No manipulation. No replacement pixels. No altered timestamps. Whoever accused you of staging this has absolutely nothing." At nearly the same moment, Alastair received a confidential report from his cybersecurity team. Their analysts had traced the first wave of misleading posts to a coordinated network connected to a marketing firm that had recently accepted consulting work from a competing technology conglomerate. The campaign had not targeted Elena personally. She had simply become the easiest way to damage Alastair's credibility. He quietly closed the report and looked once more at the newspaper still resting inside his office drawer. The rain-soaked photograph had begun as a simple act of trust between two strangers. Now that same image had become the center of a manufactured controversy neither of them deserved. Picking up his phone, Alastair called Elena directly. She answered almost immediately. Before either of them discussed headlines or accusations, he asked one simple question. "Do you still have the original memory card?" Elena looked down at the small protective case resting beside her keyboard and answered with complete confidence. "I have protected it from the moment I took the picture." Alastair smiled quietly. "Good," he said, "because the truth is about to become the most important photograph either of us has ever shared." The following afternoon, every major news network carried the same announcement. Vaughn Dynamics would hold a live press conference at its Manhattan headquarters, and for the first time since the controversy began, both Alastair Vaughn and freelance photographer Elena Whitmore would answer questions together. Reporters packed the auditorium nearly an hour before the event began. Camera crews adjusted lights while journalists compared notes, each hoping to uncover another dramatic twist. Instead, they found something unexpected waiting on the stage. There was no oversized company logo, no polished marketing slogan, and no elaborate presentation. At the center stood a single large display screen, a small podium, and a simple wooden table. Resting on that table was Elena's weathered camera beside the same protective memory card case she had carried everywhere since the rainy evening that had changed both their lives. As the room settled into silence, Alastair and Elena walked onto the stage together. Neither looked anxious. Neither appeared rehearsed. They simply looked determined. Alastair stepped to the microphone first. "Thank you for being here," he began calmly. "Over the past several days, many conclusions have been shared about a photograph that has meant different things to different people. Today we are not asking anyone to believe us because of our positions or our reputations. We are asking you to examine the facts." He stepped aside and nodded toward Elena. She took a slow breath before speaking. "I became a photographer because I believe a camera should preserve truth, not manufacture it. Every image I submit is supported by its original file, and I have never altered the reality in front of my lens." She carefully lifted the memory card case from the table. "Everything begins here." Behind them, the large display illuminated with the untouched raw photograph exactly as it had been captured that rainy night. An independent digital imaging specialist, invited from one of the country's most respected journalism organizations, joined them on stage. Without offering opinions or speculation, he walked the audience through the original metadata. The exact timestamp appeared on the screen. The GPS coordinates matched the location near Bryant Park. The camera model, lens settings, exposure information, and encrypted digital signature all verified that the file had never been altered. One by one, every accusation collapsed beneath simple evidence. Then the specialist displayed surveillance footage obtained from nearby businesses. The recordings showed Elena arriving alone with her camera long before Alastair appeared on the sidewalk. Minutes later, the footage captured him standing quietly in the rain before she approached and respectfully asked permission to take one photograph. Several moments after she walked away, the black sedan arrived. The timeline matched the raw file perfectly. A murmur spread through the auditorium as reporters compared what they were seeing with the stories they had repeated only days earlier. Questions immediately shifted from suspicion to accountability. A journalist raised her hand. "Mr. Vaughn, why did you not simply deny the accusations immediately?" Alastair answered without hesitation. "Because denial without proof only creates louder arguments. Facts speak more clearly than emotions." Another reporter turned toward Elena. "Were you ever paid to create that photograph?" She smiled gently. "No. I was paid exactly what every freelance photographer receives when a newspaper licenses an image. Nothing more." A third reporter stood. Do you regret taking the photograph now that it created so much turmoil? Elena looked briefly toward Alistair before answering. No, I regret that people chose to invent a story instead of appreciating the truth that was already there. The room became remarkably quiet. Alistair stepped forward once more. There is one more fact I would like to share. He looked toward the photograph displayed behind them. That evening was the anniversary of my mother's passing. I return to that bench every year because she taught me that character is revealed not when people are watching, but when they are not. Ms. Whitmore asked permission before raising her camera. She respected a stranger before knowing his name. That simple act of respect deserves recognition, not suspicion. No one applauded immediately. The silence itself carried more weight than applause ever could. Then, almost spontaneously, several journalists lowered their cameras. One by one, others followed. For a brief moment, the room stopped chasing headlines and simply acknowledged honesty. By sunset, news outlets across the country quietly updated their reports. The fabricated claims disappeared as quickly as they had appeared. Editorial corrections replaced speculation. Public confidence returned. Yet as Elena packed her camera into its familiar weathered bag, she noticed Alistair looking thoughtfully at the rain photograph still glowing on the large screen. He smiled softly and said, almost to himself, perhaps it belongs somewhere people can remember what truth looks like. Elena followed his gaze toward the image and, without realizing it, smiled in exactly the same way. 3 months after the press conference, the photograph that had once divided headlines found a very different home. Invitations arrived quietly, printed on thick ivory paper with only a date, a location, and 4 simple words. The Man in the Rain. No corporate branding. No celebrity endorsements. No dramatic promises. Just an invitation to experience a story told through photographs instead of speeches. Elena stood outside the renovated brick warehouse in Chelsea on opening night, adjusting the strap of her familiar camera bag while guests slowly gathered beneath strings of warm lights. She had expected a modest gallery opening. Instead, people lined the sidewalk waiting patiently for the doors to open. Teachers stood beside business executives. College students chatted with retired couples. Police officers, artists, construction workers, nurses, and families filled the line together. Everyone had come to see the photograph that had reminded an entire country how easily truth could be misunderstood. Inside, the gallery felt surprisingly intimate. Soft piano music floated through spacious white rooms where every wall displayed moments of ordinary humanity captured from across New York City. A firefighter sharing coffee with an elderly neighbor after a snowstorm. A subway musician giving his final dollar to someone with even less. Volunteers planting trees beside children learning about their neighborhood park. None of the photographs featured luxury or fame. Every frame celebrated quiet kindness that often disappeared unnoticed. Elena slowly walked through the exhibition, recognizing many images she had taken over the years, but never believing anyone else would care enough to display. Small handwritten notes accompanied each photograph. Instead of technical information about cameras or lenses, every card explained the human story behind the image. Visitors paused far longer than anyone expected. Some smiled softly. Others quietly wiped tears from their eyes before moving to the next photograph. At the center of the gallery stood a single larger room separated by dark curtains. People entered one at a time. Elena waited until the line became shorter before stepping inside herself. The room contained only one photograph. The rain-soaked portrait of Alistair standing beside the memorial bench stretched nearly 8 feet across the far wall. Gentle lighting illuminated every raindrop without overwhelming the quiet emotion frozen within the frame. Beneath the photograph appeared a small bronze plaque carrying only one sentence. Sometimes the strongest people carry the quietest memories. There was no mention of billionaires. No company. Names. No financial achievements. Only the image and its meaning. Elena stood silently beside other visitors as they absorbed the photograph. An elderly woman whispered to her husband that it reminded her of losing her own father. A young man quietly admitted to his sister that he suddenly wanted to call his mother before it became too late. 2 teenagers who had entered laughing moments earlier now stood completely still, reading the plaque twice before continuing. The photograph no longer belonged to newspapers. It belonged to everyone who had ever loved someone they missed. Elena felt someone step beside her. She did not need to turn around to recognize the familiar voice. "It looks different here," Alistair said softly. She smiled. "It finally looks complete." They stood together without speaking for several moments. Finally, Elena asked, "Whose idea was all of this?" Alistair looked around the gallery before answering. "Yours." She laughed in confusion. "Mine. Every photograph you have ever taken reminds people to notice each other. I only rented the building." Elena shook her head, smiling. "You are impossible." "So I have been told." They slowly continued through the remaining rooms, greeting guests who shared stories inspired by the exhibition. A retired music teacher thanked Alistair for the scholarship program that had already helped dozens of young educators. A teenage photography student nervously asked Elena to autograph a catalog because she wanted to become a photojournalist one day. Elena happily signed it beneath a simple message: "Always ask permission. Always protect the truth." As the evening drew toward its close, the gallery director approached them with attendance numbers. More than 4,000 visitors had entered on opening day alone, and several museums had already requested the exhibition travel across the country. Alistair smiled, but seemed far more interested in watching people than reading statistics. "Do you notice something?" he quietly asked Elena. She looked around. There were no hurried conversations about money, business rankings, or public scandals. Instead, complete strangers were introducing themselves, sharing memories, and discussing the people who had quietly shaped their own lives. Elena nodded. "They are seeing each other." Alistair smiled gently. That was always the point. As the final guests stepped into the cool evening air, a light rain began falling once again over Manhattan, gently tapping against the gallery windows like an old friend returning at exactly the right moment. 1 year passed almost unnoticed, measured not by headlines, but by quiet traditions. Every first Saturday in October, the gallery reopened its doors free of charge so families, students, teachers, and visitors from every walk of life could experience the exhibition that had grown into something much larger than anyone had imagined. Elena Whitmore continued traveling across America with the same weathered camera that had once captured a stranger standing in the rain. Her assignments had become more meaningful, yet she never accepted projects that asked her to manufacture emotion instead of discovering it. Alistair Vaughn continued leading Vaughn Dynamics with the same steady confidence, but those closest to him noticed something had changed. He no longer measured success only by quarterly reports or expanding offices. He measured it by scholarships awarded, neighborhoods restored, and lives quietly improved. Somehow, both of them had found richer versions of themselves without changing who they had always been. On a cool autumn afternoon, Alistair sent Elena a brief message asking if she could meet him near Bryant Park before sunset. He did not explain why. She smiled as she slipped her camera into its familiar bag and walked toward the place where everything had begun. The maple trees had exchanged their summer green for brilliant shades of amber and crimson. Children laughed in the distance while office workers crossed the sidewalks carrying warm cups of coffee. The memorial bench stood exactly where it always had, polished by time and surrounded by fallen leaves. Elena spotted Alistair waiting nearby. He wore the same charcoal overcoat she remembered from that unforgettable evening, although this time the sky was clear. "You chose the perfect weather," she teased as she approached. He looked upward with an amused smile. "Give New York 5 minutes." They laughed together before settling onto the bench. For a while they simply watched people pass without speaking. It felt comfortable, familiar, almost as though silence itself had become part of their friendship. Finally, Alistair reached into his coat pocket and carefully removed a small envelope. "I found something while cleaning my office," he said. Elena opened it and discovered a perfectly preserved newspaper clipping featuring the famous rain photograph. Folded beside it rested a receipt from the neighborhood bakery dated more than 25 years earlier. "Cinnamon rolls, too." Elena looked at him with quiet curiosity. "The owner kept every receipt from my mother," Alistair explained softly. "Before he retired, he gave this one to me. He said some memories deserve proof that they really happened." Elena smiled warmly. "I think he was right." At that exact moment, a light breeze carried the first gentle raindrops across the park. Neither of them hurried for shelter. Instead, they exchanged amused glances as the rain slowly returned, almost as if the city itself remembered the night their lives first crossed. Alistair looked toward Elena and asked, "May I borrow your camera?" She handed it to him without hesitation. He adjusted the settings exactly as he had seen her do countless times before and stepped back several feet. "Stand wherever you like," he said. Elena laughed. "You are the photographer now?" "Only for one picture." She stood beside the memorial bench, smiling naturally as soft rain settled across the autumn leaves. There was no perfect pose, no rehearsed expression, just quiet happiness. Alistair looked through the viewfinder for several seconds before pressing the shutter. Click. He lowered the camera but did not immediately return it. Instead, he reached into his other pocket and revealed a small velvet box. Elena's smile slowly faded into astonishment as he walked toward her. "The first photograph changed my reputation," he said gently. "I hope this one changes our future." He opened the box to reveal a simple platinum ring that reflected tiny drops of rain like scattered stars. "Elena Whitmore, you reminded me that being seen as a human being is worth more than being admired as a billionaire. You protected the truth when it would have been easier to chase attention. You helped me remember the lessons my mother spent her life teaching me. Will you spend the rest of your life making new memories with me?" Elena covered her mouth, tears mixing with the rain as she nodded before finding her voice. "Yes," she whispered. "1,000 times yes." Alistair slipped the ring onto her finger as people passing through the park noticed what was happening. A few strangers quietly applauded. Others simply smiled before continuing on their way, respecting the intimacy of the moment. No reporters appeared. No cameras flashed. The only photograph taken that evening remained safely inside Elena's camera, captured by the man who had once been a stranger standing alone beneath the rain. Months later, they celebrated their wedding in a small ceremony attended by family, close friends, scholarship recipients, teachers, volunteers, and many of the ordinary people whose lives had quietly become part of their journey. Inside the gallery, the rain photograph remained displayed exactly where it had always been, but one small addition appeared beside the bronze plaque. Beneath the original inscription rested another simple line. "The greatest pictures do not change how we see the world. They remind us to see each other." Every visitor who paused before the image left carrying something impossible to frame or publish. They left remembering that kindness offered without expectation could transform lives, that truth protected with courage would always outlast rumor, and that sometimes the most extraordinary love stories begin with nothing more than one respectful question, one quiet yes, and one photograph taken at exactly the right moment. If you enjoyed this story, please like, share, and subscribe to The Billionaire's Choice. Every week, we bring you heartwarming stories of love, destiny, and life-changing decisions. Don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss a new story.